Rite of passage. Any ritual or ceremony wherein a participant crosses a threshold, demarcating a transformation of their state of being.
It was tremendous loss for our culture when, we sort of discarded the rites of passage. It's really responsible for much of the pathology in our culture. We see it today, particularly in the situation where young people create their own, frequently, not so constructive rite of passage, but there's a need somehow that they feel for some ritual events, and if they are not being offered in a sanctioned way by the culture, they create their own.
In most archaic and non-literate cultures, there is some form of initiation into adult society, and it can take the form of an ordeal, abandonment in the wilderness, or a psychedelic experience. And in cultures that use psychedelics, this is one of the things they've traditionally used them for. And to me, what it means is when you are finally old enough to take psychedelics, you are old enough to step behind the cultural mask. You're now learning that all those fascinating spirits, demons, and magical phenomena are in fact effects in the hands of technicians and theologians who are guiding society. So in a way, in these archaic societies, what's being said is you're not fully informed as to how society works and as to how your own body works until you have assimilated this lesson. It's similar to sexuality, but unlike sexuality, it's not biologically determined or scripted into life's story. So it's some sort of something which must be brought forward by intent.
The potential that entheogens have for rites of initiation is great. I was 21 when I took LSD for the first time, and I'm glad I waited. I think it did introduce me to a new potential that I formerly was unaware of.
It seems that because we're in this sort of postmodern vacuum, in a sense, where we've lost our connection to ancient practices, initiatory cultures, it's almost like there's a kind of spontaneous reemergence of these forms or an attempt to recreate them. So we see this with rave culture, with Burning Man, with all these festivals and so on.
Another function of the rite of passage is to give these initiates kind of empirical evidence for the worldview that the culture looks with, that there are really these other dimensions. Now, this is very different from what happened in the 60s. People in our culture who had these experiences, they got alienated from their culture because suddenly their worldview was completely different. They're living in this pragmatic, materialistic culture, and they suddenly have a kind of a mystical worldview. So there's a very problematic handling of that interface.
Because modern Western science won't deal with the subjective at all, because they say you can't deal with the subjective objectively. And that's a mistake. That's a historical accident of the way science developed out of the split between science and religion in the 16th century, where the scientists needed to find out, they needed to find a way to work with the church, because the church was the controller of knowledge. They were the ruling ideology of the time, literally, what the Pope. So Galileo had to work it out with the church. He couldn't say, as he tried to say, look to the Vatican guys, look through the telescope. I said that Jupiter has moons, and they said, no, we don't need to look through your stupid telescope. We know Jupiter doesn't have any moons, because if it did, Aristotle would have told us so.
My hope was that science and the scientific method and Western approach, which was disconnected and unbalanced, but that if we could merge it with these technologies that brought forth the unconscious and look at them with the scientific method, that together, pairing those things together, that we can help people heal from emotional wounds and also from a primary identification with their race or their religion or their country or their gender.
The discovery of psychedelic effects of LSD and the discovery of the atomic energy, an atomic bomb came at approximately the same time within the Second World War. And so many people speculate that as humanity was moving, to this possibility of complete destruction of life on Earth, there's also an instrument, a tool came in that could sort of reverse that destructive and self-destructive course.
Huxley's vision, and he anticipated that in the 60s psychedelics could not be tolerated, that our society was not ready, that they could not have these potent catalysts of change prevalent within the culture. And certainly much of the upheaval of the 60s, certainly a little appreciated force to the cultural turmoil, the counterculture, the political opposition movements, was the fact that millions of people had on their own experimented with psychedelics.
Ramdas, former kind of psychedelic researcher who was fired together with Leary and Ralph Metzner from Harvard. And he, as a result of his experiences, ended up in India with Karoli Baba, a very powerful guru. And when they discussed LSD, his guru said, the Western culture is so enmeshed in the material world that it had to be something very powerful that came in, and had to come in some kind of material form for that, in a way that the Western culture understands, but at the same time that is powerful enough to awaken, them from this kind of hypnotic fascination with the world of matter.
I think what we found in the 1960s was a kind of attempt at a modern mass cultural voyage of shamanic initiation. So it was a kind of reaccessing of these deep mythic structures that the modern world had lost.
It's not until a person has a mystical experience that they wake up to this entire dimension of being. And then it's very real because they've had an experience of it. They've looked through the microscope or the telescope. Now we're in a condition where we can be initiated into these worlds.